Don't sign it, Mr. Croft. A child's voice, sharp and trembling, pierced the opulent silence of a wedding that glittered with New York's elite. Lily, the housekeeper's daughter, stood fearless, her small frame defying a sinister plot. She'd overheard the bride-to-be, Ava, scheming with a shadowy man, their whispers revealing a trap woven into the marriage contract, a ploy to seize Julian Croft's empire. What secrets did those papers hide? How could a girl so young unravel a billionaire's betrayal? If this tale of truth and treachery grips you, subscribe to the channel and share where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Will Lily's courage topple an empire's facade? What's your guess for how this unfolds? Stick with us to uncover every twist. High above the restless pulse of Manhattan, where the spires of Central Park pierce the skyline, Julian Croft's penthouse at Croft Tower cradled a secret more precious than the Rothko canvases adorning its walls. The air was heavy with the scent of old money, polished oak, Persian rugs, and the faint musk of ambition. At the heart of the attic study, bathed in the golden glow of a late afternoon sun, stood a miniature marvel, a scale model of the Croft Plaza, Julian's first triumph. Every brick, every spire, was a testament to his climb from nothing, a sacred relic of a man who'd built an empire from dreams and grit. The tiny clock atop its tower gleamed, a symbol of time's relentless march and his unyielding resolve. Julian, now in his 50s, silver threading his dark hair, stood before the model, his eyes tracing its contours. The world saw him as untouchable, a billionaire whose name was etched into the city's skyline. But here, in this quiet sanctuary, he was just a man revisiting his beginnings. His fiancée, Ava Chen, was downstairs finalizing details for their wedding, a spectacle set to dazzle New York's elite in a month. Yet Julian's heart lingered here, with this delicate creation that held his past. A faint clatter broke his reverie. He turned, catching the fleeting panic in the eyes of a young cleaner, a new hire whose name he hadn't yet learned. The man fumbled with a duster, his hands trembling as he backed away from the model. Julian's gaze dropped to the tower's peak, and his chest tightened. The tiny clock was gone. His breath caught, not in anger, but in a quiet, piercing sorrow. That clock wasn't just metal, it was the heartbeat of his legacy, a reminder of the sleepless nights and dogged persistence that had forged his empire. "Is something wrong, sir?" the cleaner stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Julian waved him off, his face a mask of calm. "No, carry on." But his eyes scoured the rug, searching for a glint of silver. He dropped to his knees, fingers brushing the thick Persian threads, each pass more desperate than the last. Nothing. The cleaner hovered, then slipped away, his silence louder than any confession. Or Julian knew the man wouldn't speak. Fear of his wrath was too great, but Julian didn't rage. He sat back, the weight of loss settling into his bones. Had it been sucked into the void of a vacuum? Was it gone forever, like the fleeting moments of his youth? He stood brushing off his tailored suit and moved to the window. Central Park sprawled below, indifferent to his turmoil. The clock's absence gnawed at him, a small but jagged tear in the fabric of his perfect world. It wasn't the object itself, it was what it meant. Time, trust, the fragile threads that held his empire together. He'd built towers, but this tiny loss reminded him how easily things could slip away. Downstairs, the penthouse buzzed with wedding preparations. Ava's voice floated up, crisp and commanding, as she directed florists and planners. Julian's lips twitched into a half-smile. Ava was a force, elegant, beloved, a philanthropist whose charm had won over even the city's cynics. Their union was to be a merger of power and grace, a story the world would devour. Yet as he stared at the model, the missing clock whispered doubt. Was everything as perfect as it seemed? In a corner of the penthouse, Lily, the housekeeper's 8-year-old daughter, sat cross-legged, her crayons scattered across the floor. Her mother, Maria, moved silently through the rooms, her presence as unassuming as ever. Lily's eyes, sharp and curious, flicked toward Julian. She'd seen him linger by the model every morning, his fingers grazing its edges, with a reverence she didn't fully understand. To her, it was a dollhouse for a giant, but she sensed its weight in his world. Julian didn't notice her gaze. His mind was elsewhere, tangled in the loss of that tiny clock. He imagined it buried in the rug's fibers, or worse, discarded like trash. The thought stung more than it should. He'd lost bigger things, deals, dreams, people. But this felt personal, a betrayal of the past he'd fought to preserve. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the study, Julian made a silent vow. He'd find that clock, not for its value, but for what it anchored in him, a belief that no detail was too small to matter. He didn't know then that a pair of young eyes had already seen more than he ever could, or that a child's quiet vigilance would soon unravel truths he hadn't dared to question. The city hummed below, oblivious to the storm brewing in the tower. Julian straightened, his jaw set. He'd built his life on precision, on seeing what others missed. But in the days to come, he learned that the sharpest eyes weren't his own, and that the smallest hands could hold the weight of his world. The penthouse hummed with the clink of crystal and the murmur of staff. But Julian's thoughts were tethered to the attic, to the hollow where the clock once gleamed. He navigated the lower floors, his presence commanding silence from the bustling wedding planners. Ava's laughter floated from the dining room, bright and practiced, as she charmed a florist over a cascade of white roses. Julian paused at the threshold, watching her. She was radiant, her dark hair swept into an elegant knot, her smile a beacon of warmth. Yet the absence of the clock lingered in his chest, a quiet dissonance he couldn't shake. He stepped into the room and Ava's eyes met his, her smile softening. "Julian, darling, you've been hiding away. Come approve these arrangements." Her voice was honey, but his nod was curt, his mind elsewhere. He played the part, nodding at floral designs, murmuring agreement, but his gaze drifted to the window, where Central Park's dusk glow mirrored his unease. In a corner, unnoticed by the whirlwind of preparations, Lily sat cross-legged on a velvet ottoman. Her crayons moved with purpose across a sketchbook, her small face furrowed in concentration. Julian barely registered her, but her eyes, bright, unyielding, tracked him. She'd seen him that morning, staring at the model with a reverence she didn't fully grasp. To her, it was a toy city, but to him, it was a shrine. She'd noticed the cleaner's fumble, the glint of something falling, and the way Julian's shoulders sagged when he thought no one was looking. Lily slipped off the ottoman, her sneakers silent on the polished floor. She clutched a small, shiny object in her fist, its edges pressing into her palm. She'd found it hours ago, tangled in the heavy drapes of the attic window, where the cleaner's hasty tug had sent it flying. Lily hadn't told her mother, Maria, or anyone else. She knew the weight of secrets, even at 8. Her father had left when she was 4, and she learned early to watch, to listen, to hold tight to what mattered. She approached Julian, her steps hesitant but determined. He was by the window now, alone for a moment, as Ava moved to greet a caterer. The city's lights flickered to life below, a constellation of ambition. Lily's heart thudded, but her voice was steady. "Mr. Croft," she whispered, "I found it." Julian turned, startled by the small figure before him. Lily's eyes were wide, earnest, holding none of the deference he was used to. She opened her hand, revealing the tiny silver clock, its delicate hands frozen at noon. It caught the chandelier's light, a spark of salvation in her palm. He froze, his breath catching. "Lily, where?" His voice was low, almost reverent, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the moment. "It didn't fall on the rug," she said, her words precise despite her youth. The cleaner pulled the drapes, and they flew into a fold. "I saw it shine when the sun hit it. I knew it was yours, Mr. Croft. You look at it every day." Julian knelt, his tailored trousers brushing the floor, and took the clock between his fingers. It was impossibly small, yet its return felt seismic. He studied Lily, her unassuming braid and faded dress, a stark contrast to the opulence around them. This child, this quiet observer, had seen what he'd missed. His throat tightened, not just with relief but with a dawning realization. Lily wasn't just lucky, she was sharp, her gaze catching details that slipped past the world's hurried eyes. "How did you know it mattered?" he asked, his voice softer now, searching her face. Lily shrugged, a small, honest gesture. You always touch it, like it's special. I didn't want you to be sad. Her words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through him. Sadness wasn't a word he allowed himself, but she'd seen it, named it. Julian rose, slipping the clock into his pocket, its weight a quiet anchor. Thank you, Lily, he said, and meant it more than he could express. She nodded, then scampered back to her corner, as if she hadn't just restored a piece of his soul. As he rejoined Ava, who was now laughing over a tray of canapes, Julian felt the clock's presence against his chest. It was more than a trinket. It was a reminder that truth often hid in the smallest corners, seen by the least expected eyes. Ava's hand brushed his, her smile flawless, but for the first time, he wondered what else he might have missed. Lily's quiet act of vigilance had shifted something in him, a crack in his perfect world. The evening wore on, guests arriving in a parade of tailored suits and glittering gowns. Julian played the host, his charm effortless, but his mind kept returning to Lily. She sat in her corner, unnoticed by the elite, her crayons tracing worlds only she could see. He didn't know then that her watchful eyes would soon see more, secrets that would unravel the very foundation of his empire. For now he carried the clock, its ticking a silent promise that no detail was too small to change everything. The night unfurled like a velvet curtain, the penthouse now a stage for New York's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms across the dining room, where laughter and clinking glasses wove a tapestry of celebration. Julian stood at the head of the table, his presence magnetic, though his fingers grazed the tiny clock in his pocket, a talisman grounding him amidst the swirl of anticipation. Ava, radiant in a silk gown, moved among the guests, her charm disarming even the most jaded tycoons. Their wedding, now weeks away, was the city's obsession, a union of power and grace that promised to redefine legacy. Yet as Julian raised a glass to toast, the clock's weight pressed against him, a quiet reminder of truths found in overlooked corners. He scanned the room, his gaze catching Lily's for a fleeting moment. She sat tucked against Maria, her small hand still clutching a crayon, her eyes bright with quiet observation. Julian's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. She'd returned more than a clock. She'd given him a lens to see beyond the polished surface of his world. But the moment passed, and Ava's hand on his arm pulled him back to the present. Darling, you're miles away, she murmured, her voice a velvet blade, sharp with affection but edged with something else. Our guests are waiting for you to charm them. Julian nodded, his smile practiced. Of course. He stepped forward, his voice carrying the room with ease. To new beginnings, he said, raising his champagne flute, and to those who stand by us through every storm. The guests cheered, glasses sparkling, but Julian's eyes drifted to the window, where the city's lights pulsed like a heartbeat. Was it gratitude in his toast, or a quiet plea for clarity? As the evening unfolded, the penthouse became a theater of opulence. Senators mingled with artists, their conversations a dance of influence and wit. Ava was the star, her laughter a melody that drew every eye. Julian watched her, his pride tempered by a flicker of unease. The clock's loss and recovery had stirred something in him, a question he couldn't yet name. Was Ava's perfection too flawless, her warmth too calculated? He pushed the thought aside, but it lingered, a shadow in his mind. Maria moved through the crowd, her tray of hors d'oeuvres a silent offering. Lily trailed her, unnoticed by most, her sketchbook now closed. She watched Ava, too, her young mind piecing together fragments others missed. She'd seen the way Ava's smile faltered when she thought no one was looking, the way her eyes flicked to a man in a navy suit at the room's edge. Marcus Vance, a tech mogul with a reputation as sharp as his tailored lapels. Lily didn't know his name, but she knew his gaze wasn't kind. Julian caught Lily's stare, and for a moment their eyes locked across the sea of silk and tuxedos. He saw it again, that clarity, that unerring focus. It unsettled him, not because he doubted her, but because he trusted her. A child had seen what he hadn't. What else was she seeing now? The night wore on, and Julian's role as host demanded his attention. He shook hands, traded anecdotes, and deflected questions about the wedding with practiced ease. But his mind kept circling back to the attic, to the model, to Lily's small hand offering salvation. Ava's laughter rang out again, and he turned to her, searching her face for something real. She met his gaze, her eyes warm, but there was a flicker, brief, almost imperceptible, that made his pulse quicken. "Julian, you're brooding again," she teased, looping her arm through his. "Come, Senator Grayson wants your thoughts on the new harbor project." She led him toward a cluster of guests, her touch both anchor and tether. He followed, but the clock in his pocket felt heavier now, its presence a quiet warning. As the evening drew to a close, Julian found himself alone by the fireplace, the embers glowing like the city beyond. Maria approached, her face soft with concern. "Everything all right, Mr. Croft?" she asked, her voice a gentle tether to reality. He nodded, but his eyes found Lily, now asleep on a sofa, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. "Your daughter," he said quietly. "She's remarkable." Maria smiled, pride softening her features. "She sees things, sir. Always has." Julian's fingers brushed the clock again, its edges sharp against his skin. He didn't know then that Lily's eyes had already glimpsed a shadow moving through his perfect world, a shadow that would soon step into the light. The wedding loomed, a glittering promise, but beneath its sheen, something stirred. Julian felt it, faint but insistent, like a crack in a foundation. He'd built his life on precision, on control, but control was an illusion, and the truth was closer than he knew. The city hummed beyond the windows, its rhythm unbroken. Julian straightened, his jaw set. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the smallest observer in the room, Lily, with her crayons and her unflinching gaze, held the key to unraveling it all. The plaza's grand ballroom shimmered under a canopy of crystal and white orchids, transformed into a dreamscape for Julian Croft's wedding day. The air thrummed with anticipation, and he, elite of New York, gathered like stars in a gilded constellation. Julian stood on a raised dais, his tuxedo impeccable, his face a mask of calm that belied the pulse of unease beneath. The tiny clock, now restored to its place atop the model in his attic, rested in his pocket once more, a silent talisman against the day's weight. Ava, resplendent in a Vera Wang gown that caught the light like frost, stood beside him, her smile a beacon of serenity. Yet as the officiant's voice droned through vows, Julian's fingers grazed the clock, its edges grounding him in a world that felt too perfect to trust. The crowd leaned forward, their whispers a soft tide of awe and envy. Every detail, the chandeliers, the string quartet, the cascade of roses, was flawless, a testament to Ava's vision. But Julian's gaze flickered, catching glimpses of the familiar. Maria, moving discreetly with a tray. Lily in a simple floral dress, hovering at the room's edge. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, met his, and he felt the same jolt from the attic, a child's clarity cutting through the haze. The officiant paused, signaling the moment for the marriage contract. Mr. Henderson, Julian's lawyer, stepped forward, his face etched with solemnity as he placed a leather-bound folder on the table. The contract was thick, its pages heavy with legal jargon meant to bind two empires. Julian reached for the pen, his hand steady, but the clock in his pocket seemed to pulse, a faint warning he couldn't ignore. Ava's hand brushed his, her touch warm, urging him forward. "Our future, darling," she whispered, her voice a velvet promise. Then a voice, small, piercing, desperate, shattered the moment. "Mr. Croft, don't sign!" Lily's cry cut through the ballroom like a blade, silencing the murmurs. She darted from the crowd, her dress a blur of pastel against the sea of black and gold. Gasps rippled through the guests, their faces a mix of shock and amusement. Maria, pale with horror, rushed after her daughter, her whispered apologies lost in the din. Ava's smile froze, her eyes narrowing for a split second before softening into a practiced laugh. "Oh, Julian, she's just overwhelmed," she said, her tone light but edged with steel. "Children, you know." But Julian didn't move. His hand hovered over the pen, his eyes locked on Lily's. Those eyes, clear, unflinching, the same ones that had found the clock, held no trace of childish whimsy. They were fierce with truth, a truth he'd learned to trust. The room seemed to fade, the chandeliers and roses blurring into insignificance. He saw only Lily, her small chest heaving, her voice trembling but resolute. "Lily," he said, his voice low, commanding the silence that followed. "Come here. Tell me what you saw." The crowd parted as she approached, her steps unsteady but determined. Maria reached for her, but Julian raised a hand, stopping her. Lily stood before him, dwarfed by the dais, yet her presence filled the space. "I was in the dressing room looking for Mama," she began, her voice clear despite the tremor. "I heard Miss Ava talking to a man, the one with the blue tie." She pointed, her finger steady, toward Marcus Vance, who sat in the fifth row, his face a mask of neutrality. A murmur swept through the guests, but Julian's focus was absolute. "Go on," he urged, his voice a lifeline. "She had a pen like the one on the table," Lily continued, her words spilling faster now. "She said to him, 'When Julian signs, the pen's micropressure tech will activate a polymer film under the page. His signature will copy perfectly onto a trust document below. He'll think it's a marriage contract, but he's signing away control of Croft Industries.'" The ballroom fell silent, the weight of her words crushing the air. Ava laughed, a brittle, too bright sound. "Julian, darling, this is absurd. A child's imagination is running wild. You can't possibly believe this." But Julian's eyes never left Lily's. He saw no deception, only the same raw honesty that had brought him the clock. His mind flashed to that moment, the glint in the drapes, the child who saw what he couldn't. Ava's hand tightened on his arm, her nails a subtle pressure, but he stepped away, his gaze now on her. For the first time, he saw the cracks in her perfection, the flicker of fear in her eyes, the too quick smile. "Henderson," Julian said, his voice cutting through Ava's protest. "Bring the pen analyzer, now." The lawyer hesitated, then nodded, retrieving a sleek device from his briefcase. The crowd leaned closer, their whispers a low hum of intrigue. Ava's laughter faded, her face paling, as Henderson approached. Julian took the pen, his movements deliberate, and handed it to him. "Check it." The moment stretched, taut as a wire. Henderson's device hummed, its light scanning the contract's pages. A red flash pulsed, and his eyes widened. "There's a polymer layer," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's active, designed to transfer ink." The truth landed like a guillotine. Julian turned to Ava, her beauty now a hollow shell. "Explain," he said, his voice cold, unyielding. Her lips parted, but no words came. The ballroom held its breath, and in that silence Lily stood tall, her small frame a beacon of truth in a world of glittering lies. The ballroom's silence was a living thing, heavy and suffocating, as the red light from Henderson's analyzer pulsed like an accusation. Julian stood rigid, the pen still in his hand, its sleek surface now a betrayer's tool. Ava's face, moments ago a portrait of elegance, had cracked, her eyes darting, her lips parted in a breathless pause. The crowd held its collective breath, their gazes shifting between the billionaire, his trembling fiancée, and the child whose words had torn the veil from a perfect day. Lily stood firm, her small hand clutching her mother's, her eyes locked on Julian's, unwavering in their truth. "Julian, this is madness," Ava finally said, her voice a strained melody, clinging to its charm. "You're letting a child's fantasy unravel our day? This is our wedding." She stepped closer, her gown shimmering, her hand reaching for his. But Julian recoiled, the pen slipping from his fingers to clatter on the table, a sound sharper than a gunshot in the hushed room. "Explain the polymer, Ava," he said, his voice low, each word carved from ice. "Explain why a child knows more about my signature than I do." Her smile faltered, a flicker of panic breaking through. "It's a mistake, darling. A glitch in Henderson's toy. You know how these devices are. Unreliable." She turned to the crowd, her laugh a fragile shield. "Surely you don't believe this story." But Julian's gaze didn't waver. He saw her now. Not the philanthropist, not the angel in white, but a stranger wearing a mask he'd been too blind to question. His fingers brushed the clock in his pocket, its steady weight anchoring him. Lily's voice echoed in his mind, precise and unflinching, just as it had been in the attic. She'd seen the truth then, and she saw it now. He turned to Henderson, whose face was pale, the analyzer still glowing red in his trembling hands. "Tell me everything," Julian commanded, his voice a quiet storm. Henderson swallowed, his eyes flicking to Ava, then back to Julian. "The polymer film, it's advanced, sir. Micropressure activated, designed to transfer ink to a hidden document beneath. It's proprietary tech. Vance Industries." His voice dropped, barely a whisper. "Marcus Vance's company." A ripple of murmurs swept through the guests, heads turning toward the man in the fifth row. Marcus Vance sat motionless, his navy tie a stark contrast to his ashen face. His eyes met Julian's for a fraction of a second before he looked away, his jaw tight. Julian's mind raced, pieces snapping into place. Vance's tech empire, his quiet presence at Ava's side, the whispers Lily had overheard. The contract wasn't a vow, it was a theft, a meticulously crafted betrayal to strip him of Croft Industries. "Marcus," Julian said, his voice carrying across the ballroom, sharp enough to halt the murmurs. "Stand up." Vance rose slowly, his movements deliberate, as if measuring every step. The crowd parted, their eyes hungry for the drama unfolding. "Julian, this is a misunderstanding," he began, his voice smooth, practiced. "I have no idea what the girl's talking about. I'm just a guest here." But Lily's voice cut through again, small but unyielding. "He was in the dressing room with her. I saw them. He gave her the pen." Her finger pointed, steady as a compass, and the room seemed to shrink around her words. Ava spun toward Lily, her composure fraying. "You little liar," she snapped, her voice shedding its honeyed tone. "You're making this up to ruin everything." She turned to Julian, her eyes pleading now. "She's a child, Julian. She's confused, or worse, coached. You can't trust her over me." But Julian's gaze was on Lily, her face a beacon of clarity in the chaos. He saw no deception, only the same fierce honesty that had returned his clock. He knelt before her, ignoring the gasps of the crowd, his tuxedo brushing the polished floor. "Lily," he said softly, "are you sure?" She nodded, her braid bobbing. "I heard them. She said your signature would give him everything. I didn't understand it all, but I knew it was wrong." Julian rose, his decision made. "Henderson, secure the contract. No one touches it." He turned to Ava, his voice cold as stone. "You and Vance, stay where you are." Ava's face crumpled, her hands trembling as she clutched her gown. "Julian, please. You're throwing away our future over a child's word?" "It's not her word," he said, his voice cutting through her plea. "It's the truth." He nodded to his security team, who moved swiftly, positioning themselves near Vance and Ava. The crowd buzzed, phones discreetly raised to capture the unraveling spectacle. Julian's eyes found Maria, who stood frozen, her arms around Lily. "Take her somewhere safe," he said quietly. Maria nodded, guiding her daughter toward the back, but Lily's gaze lingered on Julian, a silent promise of trust. As security closed in, Vance made a subtle move toward the exit, but Julian's voice stopped him cold. "Don't," he said, the single word a command that rooted Vance in place. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, a reckoning approaching. Julian stood tall, the clock in his pocket a steady pulse against the chaos. He'd built his empire on seeing what others missed, but today a child had shown him what he'd failed to see. A trap hidden in plain sight, wrapped in silk and vows. The siren's wail crept closer, slicing through the ballroom's stunned silence like a blade through silk. Julian stood at the center of the chaos, his presence a pillar amid the unraveling of his wedding day. Ava's face was a mask of desperation now, her gown's shimmer dulled by the weight of her exposure. Marcus Vance, cornered by security, held his hands up in a gesture of surrender, but his eyes burned with calculation, searching for an escape that didn't exist. The guests, once a glittering audience, were now voyeurs to a betrayal laid bare, their whispers a low hum of shock and fascination. The contract, still on the table, glowed faintly under the chandelier's light, its pages a silent confession of deceit. Julian's fingers grazed the clock in his pocket, its familiar edges steadying him. Lily's words echoed in his mind, precise, unyielding, a child's truth that had shattered a meticulously crafted lie. He glanced toward the back of the room, where Maria had whisked Lily away, her small figure vanishing into the crowd. He felt a pang of gratitude, sharp and unfamiliar, for the girl who'd seen what he couldn't. "Julian, please," Ava said, her voice cracking as she stepped toward him. Her eyes were wide, glistening with tears that might have swayed him once. "This is a mistake. I love you. You know me." She reached for his hand, but he stepped back, his face unreadable. "I thought I did," he said, his voice low, cutting. "But the woman I loved wouldn't need a hidden document to bind us." His gaze shifted to Vance, whose composure was fraying, a bead of sweat tracing his temple. "And you," Julian continued, his tone hardening, "thought you could take my empire with a pen and a lie." Vance's lips curled into a faint smirk, a last grasp at defiance. "You're jumping to conclusions, Croft. A child's word and a blinking light? That's your evidence?" He straightened, his voice smooth despite the security guards flanking him. "You'll look like a fool when this falls apart." Julian didn't flinch. "Then let's make it clear." He turned to Henderson, who stood clutching the analyzer, its red glow a damning verdict. "Run the scan again. Show everyone." Henderson nodded, his hands trembling as he repositioned the device over the contract. The room held its breath, the hum of the analyzer the only sound. The light flashed red again, and a small screen displayed the polymer's signature, a thin, invisible layer designed to betray. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Vance's smirk vanished. "It's real," Henderson said, his voice steady now. "The film's embedded between pages 3 and 4. It's calibrated to transfer ink to an underlying trust document. Whoever signed this would have unknowingly ceded control of Croft Industries." The crowd erupted into murmurs, phones flashing as guests captured the moment. Ava's face drained of color, her tears no longer a performance. "Julian, I didn't know," she stammered, her voice breaking. "Marcus, he said it was just a precaution, a legal formality. I trusted him." Julian's eyes narrowed, searching hers for a shred of truth. But all he saw was emptiness, a polished void where love should have been. "You trusted him," he repeated, his voice a quiet blade, "but not me." He turned away, his focus shifting to the contract. He lifted it, the pages heavy in his hands, and tore it in two with a slow, deliberate motion. The sound was final, a death knell for the future he'd imagined. The crowd gasped, but Julian felt lighter, as if the act had severed a chain he hadn't known he wore. Security closed in on Vance, who raised his hands higher, his voice sharp now. "You're making a mistake, Croft. My lawyers will bury you." "Let them try," Julian said, his tone unyielding. He nodded to his team, and they escorted Vance toward the exit, where flashing lights signaled the police's arrival. Ava sank to her knees, her gown pooling around her like a fallen cloud. "Julian," she whispered, but he didn't look back. Instead, he crossed the room to where Maria stood, Lily clinging to her side. The girl's eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a quiet resolve that humbled him. He knelt, his tuxedo forgotten, and met her gaze. "You saved me today," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Not just my company, but something more." Lily's lips parted, but no words came. She nodded, her small hand tightening around her mother's. Maria's eyes glistened, pride and fear warring in her expression. "She's always been watchful, sir," she said quietly. "I didn't know she'd, Julian stood, his hand resting briefly on Lily's shoulder. "She sees what matters." He turned back to the crowd, their faces a blur of awe and judgment. The sirens were louder now, a chorus of justice closing in. Ava remained on the floor, her beauty a hollow shell, as security gently but firmly lifted her to her feet. The ballroom, once a stage for a fairy tale, was now a crime scene, its magic shattered by a child's truth. Julian felt the clock in his pocket, its ticking a reminder that time revealed all. He'd built his life on control, but today he'd learned to trust the smallest voice. The city waited beyond, its pulse unbroken, but Julian knew nothing would be the same. A new foundation was forming, built not on steel, but on the clarity of a child's eyes. The ballroom's grandeur lay in ruins, its crystal and roses now witnesses to a fallen dream. The police had arrived, their boots heavy on the marble floor, as they escorted a defiant Marcus Vance and a broken Ava Chen through the stunned crowd. Julian stood alone on the dais, the torn contract at his feet, its pages scattered like ash. The guests lingered, their whispers a chorus of disbelief, but Julian's world had narrowed to a single truth. Lily's voice, small yet seismic, had saved him from a betrayal that would have crumbled his empire. The clock in his pocket ticked softly, a steady pulse against the chaos, reminding him that time, not wealth, was the currency of trust. He turned from the spectacle, his gaze finding Lily and Maria at the room's edge. The girl clung to her mother, her eyes wide but unflinching, as if she understood the weight of what she'd done. Julian crossed the room, ignoring the murmurs and the flashing phones. The elite of New York could gossip all they wanted. Their judgment meant nothing now. He knelt before Lily, his presence softening the space between them, and for a moment the world faded. Chandeliers, sirens, all of it, leaving only a billionaire and a child. "You were brave today," he said, his voice low, carrying a warmth he rarely allowed. "Braver than anyone here." Lily's lips trembled, but her eyes held steady. "I just wanted to help, Mr. Croft. I didn't want you to lose everything." Her words struck deeper than he expected, a quiet echo of the clock's loss weeks ago. She hadn't just saved his company, she'd preserved the part of him that still believed in truth. He glanced at Maria, whose face was etched with pride and worry. "You've raised an extraordinary girl," he said, and Maria's eyes glistened, her nod a silent acknowledgement. "Mr. Croft," Maria began, her voice hesitant. "She didn't mean to cause trouble. She just sees things." Julian stood, his hand brushing Lily's shoulder. "She sees what matters. That's a gift." He turned to the crowd, now thinning as police cleared the room. Ava's sobs echoed faintly from the hallway, a sound that stirred no pity in him. She'd played her part too well, and he'd been too willing to believe the script. But Lily's clarity had rewritten the ending. He moved to the table where the contract lay in pieces, its betrayal exposed. Henderson hovered nearby, his face still pale from the revelation. "Sir," he said, clutching the analyzer, "I've secured the document. The police will want it as evidence. This could be a major case." Julian nodded, his jaw tight. "Let them have it. And Vance's pen. Make sure it's analyzed thoroughly." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Find out how deep this goes. I want names, connections, everything." Henderson nodded, already dialing his team. Julian's gaze drifted to the ballroom's windows, where Manhattan's skyline glittered, indifferent to the drama within. He'd built those towers, each one a testament to his will, but today they felt hollow. His empire was safe, but at what cost? The woman he'd loved, or thought he'd loved, was gone, her mask shattered. The wedding, meant to be a triumph, was now a cautionary tale. He crossed to the fireplace, its embers fading, and stood alone for a moment. The clock in his pocket felt heavier now, not with loss but with purpose. Lily had returned it, just as she'd returned his clarity. He thought of the attic, the model of the Croft Plaza, its tiny spire whole again. That model wasn't just a relic, it was a reminder that empires weren't built on deals or signatures, but on trust. Trust in the smallest details, the quietest voices. A soft tug at his sleeve broke his thoughts. Lily stood there, her sketchbook clutched to her chest, her eyes searching his. "Are you mad at me, Mr. Croft?" she asked, her voice small but steady. He knelt again, meeting her gaze. "Mad? No, Lily. You gave me something I didn't know I'd lost." He paused, his voice softening. "You reminded me that truth isn't in contracts or promises. It's in people who see clearly." She nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "I just didn't want you to be sad again, like when the clock was gone." Her words landed softly, a balm to the raw edges of his heart. He stood, his hand resting briefly on her head, a gesture both protective and grateful. "You've done more than that," he said, then turned to Maria. "Take her home. She's earned a rest." As Maria led Lily away, the girl glanced back, her eyes a promise of truths yet to be seen. The police were clearing the last of the guests, their voices a low hum against the sirens outside. Julian stood alone, the ballroom emptying, its magic dissolved. He pulled the clock from his pocket, its silver glinting in the dim light. It was small, insignificant to most, but to him it was everything. A reminder that the smallest hands could hold the greatest truths. The city pulsed beyond, its rhythm unbroken. Julian straightened, his resolve hardening. He'd face the fallout, Vance's lawyers, Ava's pleas, the headlines, but he'd do it with eyes wide open. Lily had shown him the power of seeing, and he'd never be blind again. The ballroom's echoes faded, leaving only the faint crackle of dying embers in the fireplace. Julian stood alone, the torn contract a wreckage at his feet, the city's skyline a silent witness through the towering windows. The sirens had receded, carrying Ava and Marcus Vance into a night now fractured by their betrayal. The guests were gone, their whispers already seeding tomorrow's headlines. Yet Julian felt no weight of loss, only a strange, buoyant clarity. Lily's voice, small but unerring, had cut through the illusion of his perfect world, and in its ruins he saw something new, a foundation built not on steel or ambition, but on truth. He pulled the tiny clock from his pocket, its silver face catching the dim light. It was a relic of his beginnings, a reminder of the boy who dreamed of towers. Lily had returned it, and with it, something more, a lens to see beyond the glitter of his empire. He crossed to the window, Manhattan's pulse steady below, and let the clock rest in his palm. Its ticking was a quiet vow. He would rebuild, not his fortune, but his faith in what mattered. Footsteps broke the silence, soft but deliberate. Maria approached, her face etched with exhaustion but softened by relief. Lily was gone, likely tucked into bed in their modest apartment across town, her sketchbook still clutched tight. "Mr. Croft," Maria said, her voice steady, "I'm sorry for the chaos. Lily, she didn't mean to upend everything." Julian turned, his expression softening. "She didn't upend anything, Maria. She saved it." He paused, the clock warm in his hand. "Your daughter saw what I couldn't, what none of us could." Maria's eyes glistened, a mother's pride warring with her humility. "She's always been like that, watching, noticing. I never thought it'd lead to this." Julian nodded, his gaze drifting to the ballroom's wreckage, the scattered roses, the overturned chairs. It was a battlefield now, but one where truth had won. "She's a gift," he said simply, "and so are you." Maria's lips parted, but no words came. She nodded, a silent acknowledgement, and turned to leave, her steps fading into the quiet. Julian remained, the clocks ticking a steady rhythm against the city's hum. He thought of Ava, her tears, her broken mask. He thought of Vance, his calculated smirk now facing a cell. But most of all, he thought of Lily, her small hands, her clear eyes, her courage to speak when the world expected silence. He crossed to the dais where the contract's remnants lay. He bent, gathering the torn pages, their weight lighter now, as if their power had dissolved with their exposure. Henderson had taken the pen and the analyzer to the police, ensuring the evidence would hold. The headlines would be brutal: Julian Croft, the billionaire undone by his bride. But he didn't care. The world could spin its stories. He knew the one that mattered. His mind drifted to the attic, to the model of the Croft Plaza, its spire whole again. That model wasn't just a memory. It was a mirror reflecting the man he'd been and the one he could become. Lily had seen its value, not in dollars but in meaning. She'd seen him too, not the tycoon, but the man who mourned a lost clock, who feared losing himself to time. He slipped the clock back into his pocket and moved to the fireplace, its embers nearly gone. The warmth was fading, but Julian felt a fire kindling within him, a resolve to live differently, to see differently. He'd spent decades building towers, chasing permanence, but permanence was a lie. Truth was the only foundation that endured, and it came not from contracts or wealth, but from the smallest voices, the quietest moments. He thought of Lily's sketchbook, her crayons tracing worlds he'd never see. What did she draw on those pages? Dreams, perhaps, or truths too big for her small hands to hold. He made a silent promise. He'd ask her, one day soon. He'd sit with her, not as a billionaire, but as a man humbled by a child's clarity, and listen to her stories. The city glowed beyond, its lights a constellation of possibilities. Julian straightened, his shoulders square, his jaw set. The fallout would come, lawsuits, headlines, questions, but he was ready. He'd face them not with the arrogance of wealth, but with the strength of truth. Lily had given him that, a gift more precious than any tower. He stepped toward the exit, the ballroom's silence wrapping around him like a cloak. The clock ticked softly, a reminder that time moved forward, always. He'd lost a bride, a dream, but he'd gained something greater, a vision of what mattered, seen through the eyes of a child. As he left the room, the city waiting beyond, Julian knew his legacy wasn't in the skyline. It was in the truth he'd found, and the small, fearless girl who'd shown him where to look. The curtains close on Julian Croft's shattered wedding, a day when a child's truth toppled a glittering lie. Lily, the housekeeper's daughter, didn't just save an empire. She reminded us that the smallest eyes see the clearest truths. From the lost clock to the exposed contract, her quiet courage revealed what power and wealth could not. Honesty is the only foundation that endures. Julian's towers still pierce the skyline, but his legacy now rests in a girl's unflinching gaze, a beacon for a man who'd forgotten how to see. What did this story stir in you? Did Lily's bravery spark awe, or did Ava's betrayal cut deep? Share your thoughts. Where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your voice matters, just like Lily's, in weaving the next chapter of this tale. Drop a comment, hit that subscribe button, and let's keep the conversation alive. Thank you for joining us in this journey through trust and treachery. Your presence made it real. Until next time, keep seeking the truth in the smallest details. We'll meet again soon.